All right, Ms. Smith.
Yes. First of all, the company agrees with the ORS and the Commission that things like golf and alcohol should not be allowable, and that is why when you look at the spreadsheet, you will see that that the company agreed that those should not be allowable. It's been a long-standing policy that things like alcohol are not recoverable, and we do agree with that. There are other things on this list that charges have been reversed for. For example, Omaha Steaks was accidentally charged by an employee, and the employee paid the company back for the mistake. And we can go through this list, and similar things occur. But for the purpose of moving on with the hearing, we're happy to not have any item on this list be recoverable except the safety award. We do believe that's important. And the safety award is sort of near the bottom. It's the fourth one up from the bottom. But for the purposes of moving on, we're happy for anything on this list that's not been taken out to be taken out. But we're also happy to put Ms. Bateman on the stand, and I don't know what ORS may view this, how they may view this, but that's the proffer we wanted to make.
Well, I do appreciate that, but I would point out that it was ORS who identified Total Wine and Shipsticks and the PGA. We had to find it, and then the company agreed to remove it. So what I would think would go much further, because the whole bucket of non-allowables is like 800 and some odd thousand. What would really be good is if the company, knowing that, Party City and these things should not be in there, is if the company would go through and remove those items that are of similar ilk. Understanding that we have a disagreement on service safety awards. I understand that they disagree on that, and that's fine. But it would be very helpful to the Office of Regulatory Staff, who has been very stretched with resources these past couple of weeks, to have that happen. That would be very nice. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you, sir. Could we ask that you enter into a stipulation to leave the safety awards in, as you requested, but to exclude all other items as non-allowables?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So we won't need Ms. Bateman's testimony then. We'll go on with the next group. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Question, and I'm sorry, I may not have followed. Is that for the whole bucket of $875,000 or just this page? I'm sorry, I may have missed that. I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry, I couldn't hear you. Could you?
I was just asking if that's just for this little page or if that's the deal for the whole bucket.
When you say the whole bucket, you're referring to?
There's a $875,000 in non-allowables. Now, some of those non-allowables are litigation expenses, which are dealt with in Steve Ham's testimony. It's like 380 some odd thousand. I'm going off of memory, but what I'm trying to say is, we get a lot of expenses, and honestly, it's not. This is not much just to take.
I understand.
Yep. Yes, thank you.
Yep. In the interest of trying to move to the more important issues, and could we agree to take out the entire sum? And I'm just asking.
Sir, I don't know that I could agree right now to take out $800,000, but we can agree to work over the weekend to get this number down to where something that the Commission can feel proud of and ORS can feel proud of.
We would appreciate that. I think, and your ratepayers would as well. I think it would show a measure of accountability and transparency if we could do that.
Yes, sir.
We vote on the more important issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am. I hang on before anybody asks me another question. Ms. Metzler, I left you sitting there, and I apologize for doing that, and I see you step down, so I'm glad you were able to. So, and she may be excused. Now, Commissioner Belzer.
I just wanted to ask if we could, will that, whatever y'all are going to work on, Ms. Smith, would that be Like in a spreadsheet where we see some detail similar?
Yes, and we'll report midday on Monday where we are and provide that information.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Chairman.
Commissioner Howard,
I don't know why I'm missing something.
get close to that microphone, Commissioner Howard. We want to be able to hear your voice.
Non-allowable expenses in every rate case. Why are we going through $800 and some thousand, numerous invoices, worrying about, and I don't mean it delightful, but you know, Omaha Steaks. Why are they even? How did that invoice even get this far? Is what I'm asking.
Oh, I can tell you because it was a charge. We produced the charges, and what's not on this spreadsheet was that an employee accidentally charged it on their card and paid the company back.
That's just one.
That's just one.
We're talking about, from what Zed would say, we must be talking about, and it's guessing 1,000 entries, but and it. I just don't understand how I got this far. I really don't. It's just somehow I'm missing something.
Yeah, and I think we might need Ms. Bateman for that, so I don't know if we want to let her go after all, but.
No, I mean, I just think the question's a simple question. I mean, they are non-allowable expenses. It's pretty well obvious, I would think, but maybe they're not as obvious as I think they should be.
Well, maybe you all can get all that resolved over the weekend. That's what we're hoping because, you know, again, we saw a public outcry in our public hearings, and those people made it very clear how they felt, and so I think it just needs to be addressed, and hopefully you can agree on it.
Let's do that, and we'll hear from you on Monday at midday after.
Yeah, yes, sir. And if I could correct myself, I did not mean to be dismissive, unintentionally dismissive of Commissioner Howard's question. I think what you're asking are about our controls, and we'll provide information on that on Monday as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that ORS had an opportunity to respond to Commissioner Howard's question. I don't know if Director Edwards had a position on that because from where I sit, it did come across as if in your initial comments you had a question that was similar to Commissioner Howard's question. Why were these charges presented, and ORS had to go through and determine which ones were allowable and non-allowable?
Yes. The short answer is we get the bucket of expenses, and they are intermingled. And so we identified, for example, Total Wine, and my understanding is our audit accounting department will ship over to the utility and say, here are what we see are what items that we typically think are non-allowable. And we give the company the opportunity to respond. And then when we get the response, and actually that's where these notes are coming from. For example, our staff would not have known, Hawaiian luau or retirement or Spirit Week or baby shower. We would not have known that kind of information. We got that information back from the company when they responded back to us. But I am very interested in hearing about the controls, especially for those things that this commission has traditionally said were non-allowable, like alcohol, flowers. I mean, there's a plethora of cases where the commission has put that out there. I don't know if I answered Commissioner Howard's question well enough. Why are we only seeing it now? In the debt case, I think Mr. Nelson did ask some questions about it, but given our time constraints, I was able to spend the time with our audit department to pull this together.
Ms. Smith, I know you're going to provide a complete detailed answer to those questions, but one of my concerns, hopefully that you'll be able to address, the company will be able to address on Monday, is if ORS didn't catch it, would those costs have been passed through?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Okay. All right. We done with that for right now? Okay. Well, then let's call the next witness.
Chairman, the company's
Make sure we're on there.
company's next witnesses are Janice Hager and Steve Wheeler, cost of service and rate design.
Let's get these passed out real quick. Two for each of you, one for each person. Let's go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Mrs. Hager, let's start with you. What's your full name for the record?
My name is Janice Hager,
And Mrs. Hager, by whom are you employed?
by Janice Hager Consulting, LLC,
And for whom are you appearing here today?
on behalf of Duke Energy Progress.
Okay. Ms. Hager, prior to your appearance here today, did you cause to be pre-filed 18 pages of direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those
No.
testimony? If I were to ask you those same questions now, would your answer from the stand be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we ask that Mrs. Hager's direct testimony be copied into the record as if read orally from the stand.
Ms. Hager's direct testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
And Mrs. Hager, did you also cause to be pre-filed rebuttal testimony 17 pages in length?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to that testimony?
No.
If I were to ask you those same questions now from the witness stand, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, we ask that Mrs. Hager's rebuttal testimony be copied into the record as if given from the stand.
Ms. Hager's rebuttal testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Mr. Chairman, do you want Mrs. Hager to read her summaries before we move on to Mr. Wheeler?
You can go on to Mr. Wheeler, and then we'll do them both.
Mr. Wheeler, would you please state your full name for the record?
Stephen B. Wheeler,
And by whom are you employed?
Duke Energy Business Services, Inc.
Get right into that microphone when you talk so we can hear you.
And what is your position with Duke Energy?
Pricing and Regulatory Solutions Director.
Mr. Wheeler, prior to your appearance here today, did you cause to be pre-filed 36 pages of direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to your testimony?
No, I do not.
If I were to ask you those same questions now, would your answers from the stand be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, we ask that Mr. Wheeler's direct pre-filed testimony be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Wheeler's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Mr. Wheeler, did your pre-filed testimony have 7 exhibits attached to it?
Yes, it did.
Were those exhibits prepared under your supervision and control?
Yes, they were.
Are those exhibits correct?
Yes, they are.
I believe a portion of your Exhibit 1, the prepaid metering and the GIP pages of Exhibit 1 really have no further application to this docket. Is that correct?
The prepaid advantage tariff and the grid improvement plan tariff are not going to be considered in this proceeding, yes.
Mr. Chairman, we ask that Mr. Wheeler's exhibits to his direct testimony be identified as a hearing exhibit and entered into the record.
Mr. Wheeler's exhibits, and that's 1 through 7 with some of them that are, do we need to?
Exhibit 1 has the 2 pages that...
Okay, with the exception of the 2 pages.
Yes, Exhibit 1 includes all of the rate schedules we were proposing to implement in this proceeding. It includes those 2 tariffs as new tariff offerings.
Okay, so it's those 2 pages that we're not including.
Of Exhibit 1.
Of Exhibit 1. So the rest will be entered as Exhibit number 27.
And Mr. Wheeler, did you cause to be pre-filed 23 pages of rebuttal testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes or corrections to those?
Yes, I do.
Would you please give those to the commission now?
Yes, on page 5, line 19 of my rebuttal testimony, I need to strike the phrase "to the percentage increase approved by the commission" and insert "less than the customer-related costs supported." The question will now read, do you agree with witnesses Barnes, Howitt, and Wallach that the increase in the basic facilities charge should be limited to less than the customer-related costs supported for each specific rate class? I'd earlier mischaracterized the witnesses' positions.
With that change, is your testimony correct?
Yes, it is.
If I were to ask you those same questions now orally, would your answers from the stand be the same?
Yes, they would.
Chairman, we ask that Mr. Wheeler's rebuttal testimony with the change he just described be copied into the record as given orally from the stand.
Mr. Wheeler's rebuttal testimony with the changes just presented will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Mrs. Hager, do you have a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimony you'd like to give the commission?
I do.
Would you please do so?
The purpose of my direct testimony is to describe and support the allocation of Duke Energy Progress's electric operating revenues and expenses and original cost rate base assigned to the South Carolina retail jurisdiction and to each customer class according to the cost of service studies performed by the company. Using the principle of cost causation, revenues, expenses, and rate-based costs are assigned to the specific jurisdictions and customer classes that cause such costs to be incurred. The cost of service study used as the basis for this case begins with the official accounting books and records of DE Progress for the 2017 test year, as discussed by witness Doss. The costs are grouped according to functions, such as generation or transmission, then classified based on whether they are associated with demand, energy, or customers, and finally allocated or directly assigned to the proper jurisdiction and customer classes based on cost causation principles. Production and transmission demand-related costs were allocated based upon Duke Energy Progress's summer coincident peak demand, which occurred in July 2017. Distribution demand-related costs were allocated based on non-coincident peak. Customer-related costs, including customer-related components of the distribution system, were allocated based on the number of customers. This methodology allows the utility to assess how much of its distribution system is installed simply to ensure that electricity can be delivered to each customer if and when the customer chooses to use electricity. The idea is that the distribution system serves two functions, connecting customers to the grid and then serving the demand they place on the system. The theory behind the inclusion of a portion of the distribution system as customer-related is sound and consistent with cost causation principles, which is the foundation of the cost of service studies. Once all costs and revenues are assigned, the study identified the return on investment the company has earned for each customer class during the test period. These returns can then be used as a guide in designing rates to provide the company an opportunity to recover its cost and earn its allowed rate of return. In my rebuttal testimony, I address intervener testimony related to Duke Energy Progress's use of a minimum system study to allocate distribution system costs. Generally, interveners agree that costs such as the service drop in meter, meter reading, billing and collection, and customer information and services are appropriately allocated to the customer classification. Vote Solar's witness Justin Barnes and South Carolina NAACP, South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, and Upstate Forever witness Jonathan Wallach challenged the use of the minimum system methodology to classify a portion of the distribution system as customer-related. The concept used in the study was to consider what distribution assets would be required if every customer had only some minimum level of usage, for example, a single light bulb. Witness Barnes claims that a customer who has no demand for electricity would have no need to be connected to the distribution system. While I agree, I state that a customer who has no demand for electricity wouldn't connect to the system and wouldn't be a customer. Mr. Wallach opines that the minimum system methodology implausibly assumes that a utility would incur costs to build a distribution grid to serve customers that have no load. Again, a customer who will never have any load would have no reason to connect to the system. Witness Barnes further claims that the minimum system methodology is built on the dubious premise that customers will pay to connect to the grid even if they do not intend to use electricity. Frankly, I've never met a customer who had no intention of using electricity. I show that it is neither dubious nor implausible for the company to assume that customers who ask to be connected to the grid will want to use electricity. All customers expect that the lights will come on when they flip the light switch. In order for that to happen, the company had to install some minimum amount of distribution facilities in addition to the service drop-in meter. Without that minimum system, there is no flow of electricity. Each customer caused some portion of the distribution system to be built. The two intervener witnesses and I all look to the work of Dr. James Bonbright in his book, Principles of Public Utility Rates, for support of our positions. While it is true that Dr. Bonbright opined that allocation of cost using minimum system was indefensible, in his words, he also stated in the same sentence that excluding these costs from demand-related costs stands on much firmer ground. He ultimately concluded that these costs are theoretically unallocable, but then notes that such an answer is unworkable in a fully distributed cost analysis that utilities use in establishing their fully embedded cost of service. As I noted in my rebuttal testimony, I find the NARUC Electricity Cost Allocation Manual a more useful source of information since it moves us from Dr. Bonbright's theoretical world of rate making to the real world of utility rate making. This document was written mostly by state utility commissions and FERC staff and is still considered the basic manual for cost allocation by electric utilities. While other studies related to minimum system and basic facility charges have been published, this is the only one published by NARUC. I conclude in both my direct and rebuttal testimony that the theory behind the minimum system is sound and consistent with cost causation principles. Did I skip a page? Yes, I did. Never mind. We're turning back. I note in my testimony that with regard to the allocation of distribution costs, the NARUC manual includes only the minimum system methodology and the zero intercept methodology for determining what portion of distribution costs are appropriately allocated based on the number of customers instead of on demand. Both of these methods classify a portion of the distribution system as customer-related. A fair number of states use this method. I also note that the so-called unresolved argument in the NARUC manual noted by witness Barnes in his testimony appears to be between the minimum system and zero intercept methods, not between the question of use of minimum system or no minimum system. While it is true that the cost allocation manual is written in a non-judgmental manner, it is also true that the writers did not see fit to include the basic customer method for determining the customer-related allocation of costs. I explained that the company is proposing the use of the minimum system concept at this time because of its increasing concern with the subsidization allowed in the existing rate structure and the importance of improving the price signal sent to the customers through its rates. It is the existing rate structure that is sending an incorrect price signal that reducing energy and demand usage allows the company to avoid a portion of the distribution system that is not, in fact, avoidable. With regard to the criticisms of the method the company used for the minimum system study, I dispute witness Barnes' claim that the company double-counted demand. Double counting implies that the company is recovering the same dollars twice, and I assure this commission that such is not the case. I also find this argument irrelevant that the hypothetical minimum system would never be built today, since solar panels and batteries could serve as substitutes because the task at hand for a cost of service is to allocate existing costs. I conclude in both my direct and rebuttal testimony that the theory behind the minimum system study is sound and consistent with cost causation principles. I explain that it is the current rate structure that is sending erroneous price signals. I also rebut the specific criticisms regarding Duke Energy Progress's development of the minimum system method. Finally, I defend the company's treatment of advanced metering infrastructure and uncollectible costs. In conclusion, I note that ORS found that the cost of service methodology used by Duke Energy Progress to be reasonable. I continue to believe the methodology used by Duke Energy Progress in conducting its cost of service study for this case is appropriate and reasonable.
Thank you, Mrs. Hager. Mr. Wheeler, do you have a summary of your direct and rebuttal testimonies?
Mr. Anthony, I just wanted to make sure I have on my list a supplemental, some supplemental testimony, and I wanted to make sure we got that entered if we needed to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I totally forgot that we had filed the supplemental testimony supporting the Duke Energy Progress stipulation. Yes, sir. Mr. Wheeler, did you also cause to be pre-filed supplemental testimony?
Yes, of 2 pages.
2 pages. Do you have any changes to that testimony?
No, I do not.
Would your answers to those same questions be the same as reflected in your testimony if given orally from the stand?
Yes, it would.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We ask that Mr. Wheeler's supplemental testimony be copied into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Wheeler's supplemental testimony will be entered into the record as though given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Do you have a summary of all of your testimonies that you would like to give the Commission?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Do so.
My direct testimony explains how the rates and charges that Duke Energy Progress proposes are based upon appropriate and sound rate-making principles, They result in an equitable date basis for recovery of the company's revenue requirement across and within its various rate schedules. The testimony also describes changes to the company's retail electric schedules and quantifies the effects of these changes to retail customers. The proposed rates appropriately reflect the cost of service within the major rate classes: residential, small general service, medium general service, large general service, and outdoor lighting. I used the cost of service information prepared by the company and supported by Witness Hager as a major component for the rate design. As Witness Hager describes in her testimony, the cost of service study allocates costs to the jurisdictions in various rate classes and then identifies whether the allocated costs are caused by customer demand or energy requirements. The rate design adjustments proposed by the company in this proceeding are intended to move all rate schedules closer to a more equitable pricing structure that better recover their cost of service and reflects marginal cost relationships. The company is seeking minimal changes to the rate structures at this time to reduce customer bill impacts. The company proposes to increase the basic facilities charges to reflect the customer-related costs to serve the rate class, but has agreed to limit the charge for the residential, small general service, and small general service constant load schedules to the rates supported by the ORS in rebuttal testimony. The only new rate design is proposed excess deferred income tax rider, EDIT-1. This rider will apply to all service supplied by the company. This rider will be adjusted annually to credit customers over a 20-year period for reductions in costs realized from lower corporate income taxes resulting from the Federal Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and the North Carolina income tax rates in House Bill 989, an act to simplify the North Carolina tax structure and to reduce individual and business tax rates. My rebuttal testimony responds to the testimony of multiple intervening parties with respect to certain aspects of my direct testimony. Specifically, I respond to issues raised regarding the basic facilities charge, rate design structures, smart meter-enabled rate designs, refund of excess deferred income tax, EDIT rider, and real-time pricing hourly rates. I've addressed why I believe the company's position is appropriate regarding each of these issues while ensuring that appropriate cost recovery, while the changes advocated by the parties are not in the best interest of ratepayers. My settlement testimony supports the stipulation entered into between the company and Nucor Steel, South Carolina. The stipulation resolves certain issues raised by Nucor in this proceeding and agrees to increase rates for all LGS class schedules by an equal percentage. This concludes the summary of my rebuttal, a direct rebuttal and supplemental testimonies.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Mr. Chairman, both witnesses are available for cross-examination.
Thank you. Thank you. Walmart. Vote solar.
Good afternoon, Mr. Wheeler and Ms. Hager. How are you today?
Very well.
Good. So most of my questions are going to be for you, Mr. Wheeler, and I think I'd like to start with you to kind of close the loop on a conversation I had with Mr. Gartitego the other day. And were you here yesterday?
Yes, I was.
And do you recall our conversation? We mentioned the EPRI report.
Yes, I heard it.
And that is on residential customers' preferences. Is that right? Could you please explain what the purpose of that study is?
One problem the company's always had is trying to communicate rate terminology and rate concepts to customers in a manner that they could understand it. What the survey did, or the EPRI study did, it was 6 utility companies participated in it. And it was a series of survey questions to residential customers in the Carolinas for both DEP and DEC, trying to present certain rate concepts to customers and see what their perceptions were. For instance, it asked about basic facilities charge, for instance. They don't like calling it customer charge. They like calling it an administrative charge. It talks about demand rates. Customers have a hard time understanding what demand rates are. What the survey concluded was if you call it a peak charge, customers can better understand what that is. It also looked at their various TOU designs and what kind of TOU pricing structure may be of most appeal to customers. Surprisingly, most customers like TOU rates where the on-peak high rates end during working hours and are not home. So it wasn't a lot of surprises in it. It was informative, but I think the conclusion that I reached from reading the report was that we need to do a better job as a utility company communicating with customers and telling what their options are. And that's part of our plans as we try to develop more dynamic price rate designs, is to roll those concepts into our rate designs and our communications. Rate design can do a great job designing a rate, but if we can't communicate with customers in a manner they understand, it's going to be less than successful. And that's what the study did for us.
All right, thank you for that explanation. I think that we got a lot of information about the EPRI report that I think previously no one's been able to provide that. So were you directly involved with the development of this study?
I was not.
You were not, but you're very familiar with its results.
I have reviewed the study, yes.
Okay. And would you agree, or isn't it true that it's more than an exercise in semantics of whether customers like this charge or call it something else? It actually looks at some numbers as well. Is that true?
There are some rate concepts portrayed in it, yes.
And would you plan to use the results of this study in future rate design?
Not directly the results from the study, but it will be informative in how we try to characterize future rate structures as we propose them, and how we build them and how we promote them.
Right. And what specifically did this study tell you about the BFC besides just the semantics of what it should be called to communicate better?
They tested various levels of basic facilities charges, and customers, as you would expect, preferred a low charge. It didn't mean they would oppose a higher charge if other features were given to them which are more favorable, but taken in and of itself, they preferred a lower basic facilities charge.
Okay, thank you. And just to be clear, this report came out, I think, in February 15th, so that was after direct testimony had been filed, so you would not have been able to rely on the results before then. Did the results of this study play any part in the recommendation to accept a lower BFC in rebuttal testimony?
No, it didn't.
Okay. Thank you. I will move on then. Thank you so much for that. Ms. Hager, I just think very briefly we could borrow the technique used by Ms. Ferguson here. I would just like to ask, you remember our conversation no more than a week or half ago, 2 weeks?
Generally.
And we discussed that there were other types of cross-subsidies in rates that might be between rural and urban. There might be. So if I ask those same questions to you today, would your answers be generally the same?
Yes, they would.
Okay. I do have one additional question for you, and that would be, what is the current allocators used for production demand in the cost of service? Is it
It's a summer peak allocator.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And Mr. Wheeler, this is turning to your direct testimony, and you can look at it if you want on page 7, lines 12 through 21. You discuss, in looking at time of use rates, your analysis of the marginal cost suggested there should be a reduced emphasis between on-peak and off-peak energy rates. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
And you say that's because the difference in the marginal cost between those periods has narrowed.
Yes.
And on line 17, you state, I'm going to quote you here, and you can check me for accuracy, it no longer supports a substantial emphasis on summer pricing. As noted in the company's 2018 Integrated Resource Plan, system load data indicates winter peak demand should also be considered, should also be considered in resource planning, and consequently should be a consideration when designing rates.
That's an accurate quote.
And to be clear, the company's not made a case in this proceeding for moving away from the current allocation process for production demand, have they?
Not for the purpose of cost of service studies.
Right. But when it comes to looking at rates, Mr. Wheeler, isn't it true you looked at the marginal cost?
Yes, I looked at the marginal cost.
And
I would like to remove currently DEP's rates have higher prices in the summer months. And I recommended some changes to start to eliminate that higher price in the summer. If we're planning for winter peaking, I shouldn't be giving customers lower prices in the winter to incent usage when it just drives us to have to build more system. Generation resource and other resources to serve it.
And would this be an example to say where cost allocation is pursued one way? We're sticking with the summer even though there was a winter peak in the test year. And the rate design, you analyze this on a marginal cost basis.
For pricing purposes only, yes. I looked at it, and it looks like, for me, and our forecast, and in the future, we'll be peaking in the winter months, not the summer months. Okay. For the last 5 years, we have peaked in the winter for our annual peak. Because of that, I need to start pricing emphasis, have more placed on the winter prices than the summer prices. I'm starting to move in that direction in the rate design.
And I'll just add that I think this is the company. There's a time of transition going on, and I'm sure you've been hearing it in the IRP proceedings that the company has been moving from summer peaking to winter peaking, and the company is in this cost of service study and in historical cost of service studies has used a summer peak allocator for the purpose of cost allocation. And I support that. I believe that's appropriate. The main reason because the costs that we're recovering in this case were virtually all incurred based on summer peak. But so what I've called the elegant solution here is that we've allocated based on summer peak, but then we're using rate design to send the right price signals by shifting the emphasis to winter to push usage away from winter.
Great. I'm glad you said that. I think that illustrates the point I was trying to make. Is would you agree that the art of rate design is that the results don't necessarily have to flow from the cost of service approach you take, the cost allocation approach?
I think the rates we recommend need to reflect embedded price signals as well as marginal price signals and balance the two. It needs to consider future changes in system load, where you think system load is going, and how you should design your rates to facilitate it so that the rates you propose reflect cost causation. Many factors you have to consider.
And were you present when Mr. Wallach was here testifying?
Yes, I was.
And do you recall, I think there was a discussion about kind of revenue erosion, or as we lose the number of retail determinants, that there might be a problem with lag. And would you agree that a marginal cost of service approach might be appropriate if you're looking for a forward test year or future test year?
No, I don't believe in the marginal cost of service approach will be appropriate for setting prices. I use marginal cost to try to look directionally on how you should set rates, particularly with respect to marginal on-peak and off-peak energy. Should influence how I set time of use rates for on-peak and off-peak periods. It should also influence to some extent between summer and winter. So I try to look at those pricing relationships and take the relationships, not the actual cost itself, but the relationships between the prices.
Do you agree with Mr. Wallach that that's one tool in the toolbox that could be used, a future test year, for example, to address that problem of reduced sales?
Not necessarily, I don't.
Okay. Let me move on here. Okay, well, let's move on. I'm going to try and get through this more quickly. Would you agree that the output of the cost of the service study is highly dependent on the methodology that's chosen?
Yes, it depends on the methodology that's chosen.
And in terms of BFC, that's the methodology to determine what the customer-related costs are?
Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Wheeler, you testified in DEP's 2016 general rate case, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And did you happen to review that testimony before filing your testimony in this case?
Yes, I did.
And let's see, your direct testimony does not specifically address, in this case, I'm going to say your direct testimony does not specifically address that there had been a change in methodology since 2016. Is that correct?
No, it did not.
Okay, I'm going to hand out a couple of hearing exhibits, and in the sake of being efficient, I'm going to do them both at the same time. So may I approach the witnesses? All right. So, Mr. Wheeler, do you have this in front of you? I'm going to first turn to what is the cover page of your 2016 testimony in docket number 2016-277E. Do you see that?
-227E, yes.
At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to have this marked for identification.
We will mark it as number 28.
Thank you. Okay. And Mr. Wheeler, it might be helpful if you would open your direct testimony to your exhibit number 2 so we can do a little compare. Okay, so looking at this exhibit, number 28 that I just handed out, and turning to the back page, do you recognize this as a similar? I'll give you a second. I'm sorry. My apologies.
Yeah. Yes, I recognize it.
And this is a similar format as to what's included in your testimony in this case for Exhibit 2.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Now, on your 2016 Exhibit 2, it shows a current BFC of 650, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And a theoretical BFC of 925.
Yes, it does.
And the difference there is 275, and that represents a 42% increase, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And the term theoretical BFC refers to the full customer-related costs that are produced by the cost of service study. Is that right?
Identified in the unit cost study, yes, sir.
Right. And now let's look at Exhibit 2 in your current testimony. And you see the theoretical BFC there is $29.18, and that represents a 220% increase. Is that right?
Yes, it does.
And would you agree with me that the cost of service has not changed that significantly between 2016 and now?
No, it would not.
And that difference is driven by the methodology change. Is that correct?
Yes.
Largely. Okay, I have one more. Okay, the other hearing exhibit, which I've already handed out. Which is a data request from Vote Solar to the company as question 1-20. And I'd like to have this, Mr. Chairman, like to have this marked for identification.
Mark it as exhibit number 29.
Okay. And Mr. Wheeler, if you could turn to the second page where the question is being asked, subpart B particularly, and let me know when you've had a chance to look at that.
I have it.
Okay, great. And so do you see in the parenthetical there, this says relies on the basic customer method.
I don't see that phrase specifically.
Okay, it's at the very bottom of subpart B. It says, i.e. relies on the basic customer method to classify distribution plant costs.
In the question, yes.
In the question. Oh, great, thank you. And in the response to subpart B references a file, and that is ORS AIR 13-4 Wheeler Exhibit 2. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And if you were to flip the page, do you see a spreadsheet that captures that document?
Yes, I see it.
Okay, and if you could look there, the theoretical BFC is 991. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this is under the basic facility, or this is the basic customer method, not the minimum system method.
This is consistent with methodology approved in 2016 rate case.
Gotcha.
and it doesn't include the minimum system concept for allocating costs.
Thank you. And do you agree that the customer unit cost here will increase once AMI is fully deployed?
I don't know for certain it would. Our costs generally go up. We are going to spend more money on distribution plant, whether that's allocated as part of the minimum system, I don't know.
Is that a theoretical possibility that some of the future grid investment plan could have an impact on maybe I'll open this up to Ms. Hager as well, could have an impact on the minimum system calculation?
I believe their first question had to do with AMI, right? And I think definitely based on what we see in DEC, we would expect the customer portion of customer costs to go up because of AMI. Those are more expensive meters, and they're new meters. So I mean that's a key part. And for the grid investment plan, I think that will just depend on exactly how that plays out.
Okay, and is that a concern to you that this could actually push up the customer unit cost if they're allocated that manner?
I try to set a BFC that reflects the customer-related cost and recovers from the customer to avoid subsidization.
Okay. And based on Ms. Hager's answer there about including the cost of AMI deployment, would you agree that the $29.18 listed on your Exhibit 2 in this case might actually be higher once you had smart meters fully deployed?
If there aren't other cost reductions to offset it, it would.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, just trying to cut down the interest of time here. So I think I'll end there. So I appreciate it. No more questions.
Okay.
And actually, at this time, I would like to move these exhibits into the record. I believe they were marked.
We'll enter exhibit number 28 and number 29 into the record. Okay. Ms. Thompson.
Going to move things a little bit since I have trouble staying close to the mic. I'm going to bring the mic to me. Good afternoon, Ms. Hager. Good afternoon, Mr. Wheeler.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you again. This is when you're tall, sometimes things just aren't the right height. Okay, please let me know if y'all can't hear me. Ms. Hager, I'll start with you. Do you recall that I asked you some questions during the hearing in the Duke Energy Carolinas rate case?
Yes.
Recognizing that Duke Energy Progress, the utility we're talking about here today, is a different utility with a different system, and the numbers are different in this case. Subject to those caveats, if I asked you the same questions today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would request that the Commission take judicial notice of Ms. Hager's testimony in response to my questions in docket number 2018-319E as reproduced in Volume 8, pages 1916 through 1935 of the official transcript of the merits hearing in that docket.
We'll take judicial notice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few more few housekeeping items, Ms. Hager. I will also, or actually, Mr. Chairman, I will request that the Commission take judicial notice of the Illinois Public Service Commission's November 21, 2006 order in docket 06-0072.
Okay, we will take judicial notice.
And also request that the Commission take judicial notice of the Michigan Public Service Commission's December 11th, 2015 order in case number U-17767.
Okay, we will take judicial notice. We need the number from Illinois again.
Sure, it was docket number 06-0072. And finally, or not finally, would also ask that the Commission take judicial notice of its own Order 88-864 in docket 1988-11E.
Okay, we will.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, just
Yes.
for clarity's purposes, with regard to the Illinois and Michigan orders, by taking judicial notice, we're simply acknowledging that those orders exist and whatever it is they say, they say. Am I correct on that point?
Mr. Chairman, that, as Mr. Anthony says, that is my intent.
And with regard to the orders of this commission, it would seem to me that since they are the orders of this commission, you automatically or immediately take judicial notice of your own orders for all purposes of brief writing and any other sources of authority that are necessary to address those types of orders.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Hager, then, with that disposed of, I just have a very few questions for you. In the Duke Carolinas hearing a couple weeks ago, I asked you about a Public Service Commission ruling on the minimum system method. Do you recall that?
Not specifically. Can you?
I'll refresh your recollection. I asked you about a Florida Power and Light case, a rate case in 2010 in which the Florida PSC confirmed its prior rejection of minimum system. Do you recall that you said you thought the Florida PSC had recently allowed Gulf Power to use either the minimum system or zero intercept method?
Yes.
Okay, and you would not be aware then, or are you aware that in that case the Florida Commission was simply approving a stipulation in which the parties agreed that Gulf Power could use the minimum system method in the cost of service study for its next general rate case?
I'm not aware of that, but I would note that the Commission approved then the use of it.
But would you accept my representation subject to check?
Yes.
You also stated that the Florida Commission had previously allowed use of minimum system by an entity called Chelco, which I gather is a co-op. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And am I right that Chelco is an acronym for the Choctawhatchee Electric Cooperative?
Very good.
And Madam Court Reporter, would it be helpful if I spell that out? It's CHOCTAWHATCHEE. I will ask that the Commission take judicial notice of order number PSC-10-0153-FOF-EI dated March 17th, 2010. In docket number 080677-EI.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Hager. That's all I have for you. Mr. Wheeler, you are the rate design witness for Duke Energy Progress, correct?
Yes.
And Mr. Pirro is your counterpart at Duke Energy Carolinas, right?
Yes, he is.
Now, recognizing that you're two different people, you will recall that Mr. Pirro testified on rate design in the Duke Carolinas rate case a couple weeks ago.
Yes, I recall that.
And did you watch Mr. Pirro on the live stream, but there were some technical difficulties?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, with the caveat that Duke Progress is a different utility from DEC and the numbers would therefore be different, would you agree with me that the company's position in this case is the same as that of DEC generally in that case as to rate design?
Yes, in general terms, yes.
Okay. And you used the same methodology that Mr. Pirro used when you were designing the rates and charges proposed in this case?
For the most part, yes. I tried to do a few things like change summer-winter pricing relationships, which didn't apply to DEC. They don't have those concepts built into their rates. I tried to change TOU price relationships, which they didn't do. But with those minor changes and differences, we have a similar philosophy how to adjust rates.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm done.
So with regard to the basic facilities charge, the company used the same minimum system methodology as the basis for the original proposal to increase the BFC to $29.
Yes, and both utilities tried to reflect in the BFC full cost recovery of the customer-related cost.
Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman, I would request that the Commission take judicial notice of Mr. Piro's testimony in docket number 2018-319E as reproduced in Volume 7, pages 1535 to 1561 of the official transcript of the merits hearing in that docket.
Okay, we will take notice.
Okay. Mr. Wheeler, just a very few questions. I believe you may have just agreed with Mr. Culley that there's an art to rate design, correct?
Yes.
And there's not a pure translation from the cost of service study to the rate design.
The unit cost and the cost of service is a primary driver of rate design and price recommendations, but it's not the only consideration.
So there's some other considerations that you take into account in designing rates, like gradualism.
Yes.
And customer acceptance.
Yes.
Now, in your direct testimony, you had proposed a rate design change, increasing the BFC from $906 to $29. Is that right?
Yes.
And then in your rebuttal, based on principles of gradualism, you reduced that proposal to $19.03.
I didn't actually recommend reducing it in my rebuttal testimony, but I said that was an option the Commission could consider if gradualism was important, and it was consistent with what I had testified to in North Carolina.
You haven't withdrawn, the company hasn't withdrawn its proposal to increase the BFC to $29?
No, the company filed a stipulation that we had agreed to the rates proposed by the ORS in their rebuttal testimony, and we're adopting those for the residential, the SGS class, and the SGS constant load class.
And so you are referring to, I believe you may be referring to a letter that the company filed saying it would not contest a basic facilities charge of up to $11.78. Is that right?
Yes, in a letter dated March 26th, we agreed to that.
Now, Mr. Wheeler, you are still asking the Commission to accept the use of minimum system methodology in this case, correct?
I think I would be the better one to answer that, and the answer to that is yes, definitely.
Okay, and thank you, Ms. Hager. And back to you, Mr. Wheeler. The company is planning to continue filing rate cases in the next several years, correct?
It's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And if the Commission allows the company to switch to use of the minimum system method, the company will, would you agree with me that the company will seek further increases to eventually get to that theoretical BFC of $29?
As a rate designer, I want to try to minimize cross-subsidization. The cost, we believe, to serve a customer is $29, and we think the rate should be set there to eliminate subsidization of customers, low-income customers, being subsidized by high-usage customers.
So was that just a kind of a lengthy yes in response to my question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I believe that's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Hager, Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you. Sierra Club. Thank you. Energy users. Nucor. ORS. You got a lot of them? Okay. I didn't mean to blurt that out. I was just trying to get clarity here as to where we are in the afternoon.
I never like being the last on a Friday. I think all of my questions are for Mr. Wheeler. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Wheeler, you've already answered a lot of these questions about, looking at other considerations just beyond the cost of service study when you go in designing rates. Correct? I mean, for example, the principle of gradualism, the company has in North Carolina and most recently here in South Carolina for residential, small general service, the company has offered a rate that differs from your original proposed rate for the BFC, correct? You've come down off the $29.
Yes.
Okay. All right. After the night hearing in Florence, South Carolina, I guess the first question is, are you aware about Harry Ott's letter that was, he's the president of the South Carolina Farm Bureau?
Yes, I've read it.
Okay. And just to keep this as short as possible, what is the company's position on that rate for medium general service for a BFC?
The company supports the rate we proposed in my rate design.
Okay. So the company at this time would not look to, I think the number was around $21.38. The company would not propose to move to that rate at this time.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. You mentioned you've seen Mr. Ott's letter. Have you seen ORS's letter in response?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, may I ask for Mr. Ott's letter and ORS's letter in response to be the next hearing exhibit, marked for identification and moved into the record?
Could I elaborate just slightly on why we didn't change our recommendation?
Absolutely.
Only 1% of MGS class revenue is recovered in the basic facilities charge today. It's actually 1.1%. And at the rate we're asking for a 24% increase in the revenue recovered through that charge, which means that if the entire amount is approved, it would still only be 2.5% of the overall revenue. The basic facilities charge was a major cost component of the bill for your SGS class customers and your residential customers. It's a very insignificant portion of the MGS class customers' bill. Therefore, we don't feel like it's burdensome on those customers with $400 and $500 bills a month to pay an extra $20 a month for the basic facilities charge to eliminate cross-subsidization of the customer-related costs by the customers within the class.
Okay. My understanding is there's, I think I heard Mr. Kojo, don't tell him. Basically, I heard there were 71, and out of 71, 59 could move to a different rate schedule. Is it correct to say that there would still be some farmers that would be on the medium general service? Is that a true statement?
It is, and there's some disagreement. I looked at all of the customers we serve in South Carolina on agricultural SIT codes. Those are the 200 series, the 100 series, and the 700 series, and identify 513 customers that we've considered to be farming related. Of those, 76 of them are in the MGS class schedule. I reviewed the bills for all of those customers, and of those, 59 could save under a different rate schedule. Some of them had load below a 30 kW level, so they can move to a different rate class, the SGS rate class. Some were better off on our small general service time of use rate schedule. We'd move them there or recommend they move there. And some were better off on our seasonal intermittent schedule. But we have contacted all the customers who could save on an alternate schedule and made them aware that there was a more beneficial schedule for them. On average, they saved 14% if they switched rate schedules.
And you're fairly certain about the 71?
It's 76.
76?
I found.
Okay, 76. What would be your rate? I believe it's $40. Is it for the BFC if for the medium general service?
Yes.
Okay. And and for those that are not part of the 59, are you still looking at ways that you can mitigate the increase in the BFC and through some other billing mechanism?
Well, for the ones that were left, it's not a very large portion of the monthly bill for those customers. Okay. So it shouldn't be burdensome.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that the letter and the response, Mr. Wheeler is familiar, he has read it. I would ask that it be a hearing exhibit.
Mr. Ott's letter and the ORS response will be entered as composite exhibit number 30.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Chairman. I promised I was short.
Thank you. Thank you. Commissioners. Commissioner Howard.
I'll be short.
I've heard that one.
Ms. Hager, sort of walk me through. In previous rate cases, you've used the basic customer method. Then we go into the minimum method, and then also out there floating somewhere the zero intercept method. Walk me through why you changed from the basic customer, and given the other two remaining, and there are probably more than that, methods, why you chose which one you did.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. So the order from the late 80s from this commission, which told Duke Energy Carolinas, or Duke Power at the time, denied their use of minimum system, weighed into the decisions that were made for both companies going forward in their next rate cases. But if you think about Duke Energy Progress, they didn't have another rate case until 2016, and now this is the second one since then. And I think the several things are going on that led the company to say, while the company has always believed, as far as back as I can see, that that classifying a portion of distribution cost as customer related is appropriate. They, based on that commission order, chose not to do it in the last case. But now I think that there's a growing concern. First of all, it's been discussed, load is fairly flat. And so the more that you are pushing costs, you're deviating from cost of service and pushing costs into an energy charge that then is not going to, you're not going to recover additional revenues from that, then you're creating a bigger and bigger gap on recovering your costs. I think, and then you've also got this issue with the concern about behind the meter solar and the price signal that you're sending there when you've got a basic facilities charge, or you've allocated cost on a basis that is not truly reflecting the cost to connect those customers, the cost to serve those customers. So I think that the key here is that, as is often the case where you've the company has a view on this is the appropriate way to do cost of service. We had an order which said don't do it. We believe the time is appropriate now to say we want this commission to reconsider this because we think it is of growing concern that it is not being used. So the question then is, what method would you use? And the company has been using the minimum system method for many years. As far as I know, I'm not sure the company has ever done a zero intercept. The NARUC CAM cost allocation manual indicates that the two typically would produce similar results, could produce similar results, but that the zero intercept is more complicated. It involves regression analysis. But the company believes, and I fully support the idea, that there are costs associated with the distribution system that are there simply to connect a customer in order to assure that if they flip the switch and they've got one little light bulb there, that they're going to have power. And so I think it was, just in quick summary, it was a recognition that we thought the time was ripe for the commission to reconsider that, and that's why we've put it forward at this point in time.
Another question. How often should a company do a cost of service study, and what should trigger that particular cost of
Well,
It would be period.
Well, the company does cost of service studies at least every year and files them with this commission, I believe. I know they're done every year, but they are always the basic support for a rate case.
Thank you. My last question, Mr. Chairman. Did you read Bright's Principle of Electricity?
I have read I've read the exciting parts.
I would wish you would point that out to me. In college, I had Machiavelli beside my bed, and I read the print. And as soon as I'd pick up the book, I'd fall asleep. And the only reason I had Machiavelli was there is because I did not know about Bright's Principle of Electricity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I really don't know how to follow up. Commissioner Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Hager, if you don't mind. In preparing for this rate case, did Duke prepare more than one cost of service study?
The company always prepares a cost of service study related to existing rates, proposed rates, those sorts of things.
Did they utilize more than one methodology for cost of service studies and then decide they were going to submit the one they did with this application? Did they compare methodologies and then go with one over the other?
I don't recall. I don't know for certain whether they did. But it would be known the general impact.
Would Mr. Wheeler know the answer to that question?
I know in North Carolina we look at multiple allocations of costs, multiple methodologies. I don't know about South Carolina.
It's typically related to
production plan
production
allocation.
and transmission, but not related to distribution. Typically.
Okay. Are y'all just on the BFC, or has anybody recalculated the energy component with regard to the letter that Duke filed on the stipulation of residential and small general service BFCs?
I have not redesigned rates yet to reflect all the changes we've agreed to.
Okay. Mr. Wheeler, I want to follow up on the farmers we heard about at the night hearings, and I know you weren't there, or I don't remember you being there.
I was not there.
But you mentioned that y'all had tried to locate or identify the farmers. Is that per farmer or per meter? Because we heard testimony that some of them have numerous meters.
It's per meter to count. When customers sign for service, we ask them what type of business they are, and we assign a standard industrial classification code to each account. To the extent they identify their farmers, we'd identify them as a farm account. If they didn't, we'd put a general business classification on them and couldn't identify them separately.
So when we're talking about 76, those are accounts. Well, would those accounts have multiple meters? Could those accounts have multiple meters, or would it?
I looked through this list of 76, and they all appeared to be unique people, not Murphy Farm number 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, because, we were hearing testimony where somebody would have 14 meters, or somebody would have, I think one said 30 meters, and it just seems like we might not be gathering all of those. I'm curious about that.
And that's part of the problem I have. We have a special rate schedule called the Seasonal Intermittent Service Schedule. We designed it back in the early 70s. It came out of a cotton gin rider, if you've ever heard of that. We still have the cotton gin rider 40.
I'm familiar with that one.
But we started with that, and then we worked into a schedule that applied to more than just cotton gin customers. It was intended to apply to customers who are seasonal in nature, who usually have at least 2 consecutive months with reduced usage. And if that fits your type of operation, then you don't have demand charges associated with your bill. You don't have demand ratchets associated with your bill like we do for the MGS schedule, which is Apple to larger customers. Our problem is, how do we tell farmers that the rate schedules are out there? When I looked at the list of customers, about 40 of them saved under the SI schedule. So now we are telling those customers, so how do I communicate to other customers is my struggle.
Well, and I don't have my rule book with me today, but when people sign up, aren't they advised or try to be advised of what might be the most beneficial
We do that.
rate schedule?
We tell them what the options are and help them make a decision at the time they sign up for service. We also send out, next month, I'm going to send out in May to all non-residential customers a list of every rate schedule, and SI will be on there, as well as SGS TOU, which is available to them in the MGS schedule in the 30 kW to a megawatt class.
Will the list have a small description to allow? I mean, if you get a list like the table in the beginning of the rate schedules, nobody's going to know they're not going to know what that is.
That's the problem. How do I communicate that without giving them a 10-page document?
Well, are you going to say, give us a call, let us talk to you, we'll have people ready to help?
That's at the bottom of it. It says, if you have any questions on what rate schedule applies, contact us, and it has a number for them to contact us.
I reckon when a farmer needs a line run to one of these irrigation pivots, they're going to be charged a contribution in aid of construction, are they not?
Under the line extension plan, they will be charged based on the construction cost minus a revenue credit. The revenue credit would reflect what rate schedule applies to their usage and what the annual revenue would be.
It just seems like that somebody, when that comes in and somebody's having to run the line, is it Duke employees or is it a subcontractor that's running at the actual line out there? Because, I mean, you got to trench it. They can't have poles running out there to heed the pivot, and heed the irrigation system.
Most of the lines in rural areas are all overhead at this point, not underground, because they have a chance of digging up underground lines.
How are you going to run an irrigation system around a pivot and have poles out there? The ones I'm used to seeing, they don't duck. Yeah. So, but it just seems like that is an indication to the company of what the usage is going to be.
Well, the contact we have with the customer, though, is when the customer calls in and applies for service. Then our technician will go out and decide how's the best way to provide electric service to the customer. At that point, he can make them aware of what rate schedules will be available to them. But the primary contact is when they call and apply for electric service. We advise them at that point.
Okay, so when the technician goes out there, then there's no communication back that says this is what's being done? Or
it's responsibility if it's a company employee running a line or the contractor is to provide electric service where the customer's designated he wants it delivered to.
Just seems like there's a opportunity for some customer service somewhere along this line.
I have a suggestion, and I'd like for you to consider it. We were talking with the president earlier about the need to reach out to the agricultural community, and it would seem to be a great service to the agricultural community if you had a Duke Energy Progress representative who is co-located with the Farm Bureau and or the South Carolina Department of Agriculture to field these type questions and calls, and also to promote a better understanding about these various rate structures and how they might benefit from moving from one to another. Because there's kind of I think there's a failure to communicate issue here that could be fixed. There are 100,000 approximately members of the South Carolina Farm Bureau. So if we've only, found 70, how many? 72?
513 total.
513 total. That seems very low to me. If there are 100,000 Farm Bureau members, that number seems extremely low. It's a fraction of what's out there. So I would encourage you to reach out. I don't know which would be the better option, but at least you've got a database with Farm Bureau, and they have a newsletter and a website and all that, and you could have your representative explain this to the membership, and I think you'd have a better outcome.
Thank you. Commissioner Belzer, will you finish?
I will comment. I am a Farm Bureau member.
As am I.
I don't have a farm, but...
Good. All right. And I reckon where I was getting to is I noted a couple of times where you said that with regard to the redesign of the BFC, and don't get me wrong, I'm very appreciative of what Duke has done thus far on the BFC, and agreeing with parties on reducing that. That's very welcomed. But I noted you said not a very large portion of the monthly bill for those customers should not be burdensome. If it's 1 meter, maybe. But when you're talking 14, 20, 30 meters, it adds up. So let's not forget that. But thank you both for being here and for answering my questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Commissioner Hamilton.
Very short, Mr. Chairman.
Get up close to that mic, Commissioner.
Ms. Hager.
Yes.
I noticed that you said in your conversation earlier that you knew that the minimum system method had been disapproved by this commission
Yes.
sometime back.
Yes.
Why was it used without asking the commission for approval?
It was used, I think that order said it was inappropriate for that case. And there was nothing in that order which said you can never propose it ever again.
Well, since then, you've used the one that was approved by the PSC, the basic customer method.
That's correct.
Did you run that along with your new method?
I don't know if that was run before we had it as part of a data request, but we did run it as part of a data request, and that's been some of the information that's been discussed today.
I know we've been dancing with it for a long time, and we really still hadn't. In my mind, it's not clear if this is the way that we should be going. Right. Would it be too much to ask for it to be run under the old system to see where we stand?
We have run that, and we can.
Get a copy then,
that should not be a problem.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Chairman, I request as a late file exhibit.
I would point out I was cross-examined on it a few minutes ago. We have run the analysis of going back without minimum system, and these are the rates that would result from that on this exhibit from Volt Solar.
All right. Thank you, sir.
And is that sufficient, or do you want to see the entire cost of service? I think this is the most informative piece.
Okay, so that suits. Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Mr. Anthony, yes, redirect.
I'm going to do this as expeditiously as it can be done, which means I will either make some statements and avoid having to do redirect, or I'll ask some very leading questions. So stop and object as we go in the interest of time. But first of all, the Chattahoochee order that the commission was asked to take judicial notice of, I'd ask the commission to take judicial notice of any and all orders that are in that docket, in case when I go look, there's something in there I'd like to include in the brief to put everything in context. So
we'll take notice.
Thank you. With regard to another item of, if I'll just make a statement, Mr. Wheeler was asked a question about whether that Mr. Wheeler will continue to use the minimum system approach in designing the basic facilities charge, and he basically said yes. He also had agreed earlier he adopts Mr. Pirro's testimony, and then we've had Mr. Gartatego testify. You just say yes in just a minute. That's the answer coming from the rate designer, that he will follow cost causation principles, but the company has testified that there are policy considerations that may influence whether the minimum system dollars allocated through that approach, when they get to the residential class, et cetera, whether that will result in the basic facilities charge being based entirely upon the minimum system. There will be policy decisions made by the company that may change whether we continue to seek full $28, $29 increase. So,
Mr. Chairman,
yes?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to object to Mr. Anthony asking leading questions of his witnesses, but I do object to Mr. Anthony effectively testifying. He's welcome to brief these points, but I believe it's inappropriate to be testifying to this, for the attorney to be testifying to the commission.
And I agree. That's why I said I'm going to ask some leading questions in the interest of time. I could have gone through this with Mr. Wheeler and it had taken 5 or 6 questions. I tried to truncate it. Sorry.
Okay, sustained. I'm sorry. We'll just move it on.
Well, Mr. Wheeler, did you hear the questions you were asked about adopting Mr. Pirro's testimony?
Yes.
All right. And do you recall whether Mr. Pirro caveated his response about using the minimum system based on policy direction from senior management at Duke?
I don't doubt that's what he said.
Well,
I did not hear it, so I can't say.
Are you subject to policy directions from the senior management of Duke in designing your rates?
Yes.
And it's possible they would say, don't use the minimum system entirely to develop your BFC. There are some other reasons like gradualism. You would propose to offer a lower rate than cost of service justifies?
That's correct.
Thank you. Mr. Wheeler, with regard to the farmer issue and the, I think it's 17 accounts that of the 76 that apparently would not benefit from moving to SI or SGS, for those 17, are they the largest MGS customers of the 76?
Yes, they are.
They have the largest bills?
$800 a month on average.
And that was partially the reason you said that the increase in the basic facilities charge was not as impactful for them as it was the others?
Yes.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Hager, you were asked to adopt and reaffirm your testimony from the DEC case, and in that case you were asked about a public staff of North Carolina study of the minimum system. Do you remember that?
I do.
And you referenced the study in your testimony, but it was not complete at the time of your testimony in the DEC case. Has that study now been completed?
Yes, it has.
And that was a study by the public staff of the North Carolina Utilities Commission regarding the minimum system process and the validity of it?
Yes.
Did the public staff find anything inconsistent with your testimony with regard to the use of the minimum system?
No, they did not. They affirmed that their belief that a portion of distribution costs are customer related, and that and their concern about cross subsidization if the basic facilities charge is set too low. And so I think it's this idea of making sure that you're doing cost of service in a way that you truly understand the cost to serve the customers, and then if you want to vary from that for policy reasons, for gradualism, things like that, that's the appropriate place to do that. But don't truncate it in the cost of service study before you fully understood the cost to actually serve that group of customers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any recross?
Very quick. Hopefully, 2 yes/no questions. Okay. First, this is following up, Ms. Hager. Are you aware that there's a settlement agreement addressing net metering that prohibits additional charges being imposed on those customers?
Not specifically.
Okay. So if that were the case, would you have to raise the BFC on everybody in order to address the solar issue you outlined?
Would you be? I'm struggling. I'm struggling.
I could address that. We're not trying to increase the BFC because of solar customers. We're trying to increase the BFC because the customer-related cost we want to recover in the BFC is a higher amount than we're currently collecting. It's not intentionally trying to address any net metering customer or non-net metering customer.
Mr. Chairman, I'm remiss. I'm new at this Ms. Ferguson technique. I forgot to ask that the chair recognize and take judicial notice of the transcript of my cross of Ms. Hager in the previous case. I can point to the line number 15 on page 1910 of volume 8, March 27, 2019, and line 19, page 1916. That's where it ends.
Okay. We will take judicial notice. Thank you. Okay. Any other recross? Well, okay.
And I don't have any recross, but just a housekeeping item that I neglected to take care of. Mr. Anthony was kind enough to file a letter with the commission on March 26, 2019, with some corrections to Ms. Hager's and Mr. Wheeler's testimony, but I don't believe he walked the witnesses through those. So I guess we could ask that letter be entered into the record, just to clean things up.
Yes, sir, no objection.
Okay, so all right, let's identify the letter and make sure that we've got it written down.
I've got it on my computer screen as a letter dated March 26, 2019, addressed to Ms. Boyd, subject line docket with this docket number from Mr. Anthony.
Okay, I think that's good. We just wanted to make sure we had the right date. And okay, we'll enter it as exhibit number 31.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you.
Move all of our exhibits and ask the witnesses to be excused.
Okay, so we've got all the exhibits. Okay, thank you very much for your testimony, and you may step down and be excused. Now, I think Mr. Stark wants to speak with the parties, not right now, after I leave, and about some procedural matters for Monday. And if there's nothing else, we are adjourned.